Welcome to another Camel Clutch Blog Extra podcast. As today we look back on the year 2013. Now, the blog is up on the website. It's doing well. I know that you're familiar with everybody's choices, but today we're going to go a little deeper into those choices and open up the book a little bit more and talk about the amazing year 2013 in pro wrestling, the WWE, and time permitting, we could talk about TNA and Ring of Honor and anything else that went down that was big news in 2013. And speaking of big news, I am joined today by two news makers and two news shakers. And that is Jeff Peck from the Still Real to Us radio show podcast, and of course contributor to this great blog, as well as over at Wrestle Chat. And speaking of Wrestle Chat, the man, the myth, the legend, the grand poobah of WrestleChat.net, Brett Clandaniel. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Eric. Thanks a lot for having us, man.
I feel the same way. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it's an honor to be joined by the both of you guys. We've always had some great conversations through emails and other podcasts, so I thought it'd be a lot of fun to get the three of us together, get the band back together, so to speak, and run down the year. So, with that said, let's jump right into it. Wrestler of the Year. I didn't waste any time on the blog and dance around what some would say was the biggest award, so to speak, and that would be Wrestler of the Year. Now, I'm looking at mine, and I had Daniel Bryan. Brett, you had Daniel Bryan. And Jeff, you had Daniel Bryan. So not a whole lot of debate going on about the Wrestler of the Year, although we can talk about some of the other choices here. Eric Darcy had CM Punk. Terry Bay had AJ Lee. So that's a little out there, but I can certainly respect her choice in the matter. But it seemed like Daniel Bryan was a runaway pick for Wrestler of the Year. So, Jeff, if you want to start first, just talking about Daniel Bryan, the year he had, and what put it over the top for you.
Well, for me, it was Daniel Bryan. He finally became that wrestler. Like all of us, quote unquote, hardcore fans, we knew what Daniel Bryan could do in the wrestling ring. It seemed like to me in 2013 that every other wrestling fan, the stereotypical WWE fan, started realizing what Daniel Bryan meant to the wrestling world as well. And for me, one of the funny things, and I thought this was weird, that we give a Wrestler of the Year award out to a guy who had 2 world title reigns, and he may have held it for like 25 hours most. Because he had it for 15 minutes at SummerSlam, and then held it for a full 24 hours shortly after Night of Champions. I don't think it was close with anyone else. I know, in all due respect to Eric and all the other writers out there, Terry as well, I didn't think it was close. I thought Daniel Bryan had the best year in professional wrestling. I didn't think anybody held a candle to him. He was the most popular wrestler in the start of the year, and he was the most popular wrestler at the end of the year. He was fantastic with Team Hell No with Kane, and he ended it off with one of the bigger storylines of the year with Randy Orton and the Authority, and then what we saw a couple days ago on Monday Night Raw, depending on when this airs, him joining the Wyatt family. It was a great year for Daniel Bryan, and hopefully it carries over in 2014 as well. So that's why I chose him as the Wrestler of the Year.
Now, Brett, you, as I'm looking at the blog now, you probably had the most lengthy paragraph about Daniel Bryan becoming Wrestler of the Year. So obviously, in my mind, you're the most passionate about it. So why don't you talk a little bit about what your thinking was, and was there anybody that you even thought about for a second that gave Daniel Bryan a run for the money here?
I really don't. If anybody, maybe Randy Orton, maybe John Cena or CM Punk. I don't know. But I think Daniel Bryan was just it was so obvious to me, and I thought he was going to be a unanimous choice, as I mentioned. He started off the year with a really successful Team Hell No. He had a really good, he's never in a bad match. You can put him in there with anybody, Raw, SmackDown, main event, and he's going to give it his all. He really elevated the people that he was in the ring with. I do wish, like probably both of you, that his world title feud ended a little bit differently. I mean, I think that was really, really booked horribly, but I think he was head and shoulders just better than everybody else. He really made a name for himself in 2013.
And it's funny because especially online, CM Punk, at least the last 2 or 3 years, he generally runs away with most of the nominations here. And when you think back at the year 2013, Punk had what I thought was a match of the year with The Undertaker, but it almost seemed like his year took a little bit of a step back as compared to 2012 and, of course, 2011 when he just exploded in that second half of the year. Thoughts, guys? And I'll throw it back to Brett first on CM Punk's 2013.
I think he had a solid 2013 as well. To me, what hurt CM Punk was while I felt like his feud that he had with Paul Heyman throughout the year, I thought that was the best feud of the year. But I thought that for me, working with Ryback so much during the course of the year, to me, that kind of watered it down. The Undertaker thing, that was fantastic. Some of his best work. Were in those promos leading up to WrestleMania 29. But for me, I kind of felt like it was a big step back. I don't think he had a bad year, but I don't think anybody had a better year than Daniel Bryan. And really, that's what it came down to.
And Jeff, your thoughts on CM Punk's 2013?
I thought it was a solid year. It kind of reminded me of John Cena in 2012, where they had him take a step back. You know, he entered the year as WWE champion, dropped the title to The Rock, but he had solid matches throughout the entire year, as Brett pointed out. And his feud with Paul Heyman was arguably the best feud in professional wrestling in 2013 as well. And I feel like that's a good thing for professional wrestlers, is you got to take a step back a little bit from the limelight, the main event picture. And the hope is with a guy like CM Punk, as Brett pointed out there before, is when you're in feuds with guys like Ryback or Curtis Axel or even, Brock Lesnar doesn't need it, but the Curtis Axel and Ryback feud, you would hope that those guys could have been elevated more. Obviously, that's not the case. But overall, I thought CM Punk had a fantastic year. His match with The Undertaker was fantastic at WrestleMania 29. His match with Chris Jericho at Payback was a great match. His match with Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam was an awesome match. He had a great match with John Cena, which we'll probably talk about here in a little later on Monday Night Raw. That was fantastic. So he had great matches throughout the year. It just, like Brett pointed out, it was Daniel Bryan's year, and it was a little bit of a step back for CM Punk in the realm that he just wasn't the focal point of WWE television throughout 2013.
A guy I thought at one point was going to make a serious charge for this Wrestler of the Year award was Dolph Ziggler. It seemed like at one point during the year, a very brief one point in the WWE 2013 year, that somebody woke up and realized what a great talent that Dolph Ziggler was, and that he had the Money in the Bank briefcase. And for Dolph Ziggler, I thought that at that point, I thought he got to that level. He was going to get to that level where he was going to get over that hump, and it was very, very brief, and it was such a short time. But I thought there was a guy right there that showed glimpses of greatness, quite frankly, and he just never got the opportunity. But I mean, we could say that about a lot of guys in the WWE.
Oh, without a doubt. Ryback immediately comes to mind as a guy who had an opportunity to be a big player in 2013, and he didn't. For me, Eric, I felt like Dolph Ziggler kind of, he fell off the face of the earth because of that concussion. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing that happened to Fandango this year, is that those two guys, right around the same time almost, they were big players in WWE. They had the fans behind them. They were involved in major storylines and major matches. One held the world championship. The other was feuding with a world heavyweight champion and a wrestling legend in Chris Jericho. And they both just fell off the face of the earth. And I feel like it was just poor timing for those guys to both get injured, because Curtis Axel swooped right in, took the Intercontinental Championship for Fandango. Then Alberto Del Rio and Ziggler kind of had a feud heading into the summer, and then Ziggler was just completely out of the picture as they had other focus going on with the World Championships at that point.
Yep, and Brett, I'll throw it back to you as we wrap up this segment here on Wrestler of the Year. And Jeff, if there's anything you'd like to chime in with after Brett, feel free. We're talking CM Punk, we're talking Daniel Bryan. Looking ahead to 2014, when we're doing this podcast in January 2015 or in December 2014, you're getting that ballot together. Who do you think has the bigger year this year? And we're talking January, so we have a long road ahead. Daniel Bryan or CM Punk?
I believe it's going to be Daniel Bryan, just because from all indications, it looks like CM Punk's contract's up in 2014, sometime in the summer. And
here we go again.
Yeah, here we go again. But judging by his Twitter feed, I mean, it just seems to me like the guy's not having fun anymore. And it wouldn't shock me if maybe he's not here by this time next year.
He's miserable. Let me tell you, as somebody that spent a very brief amount of time with him on the independents, the guy's always been miserable.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would hope the millions of dollars and going home with AJ Lee makes things better, but I guess it's all life sucks for CM Punk apparently.
You would think so, Brett. You would think so. Jeff, CM Punk, Daniel Bryan in 2014.
I think I'll go on the opposite of the coin on this one. I'll go CM Punk. I think his feud with Triple H, reported feud, alleged feud that will be happening around WrestleMania time, will be pretty big. A match, and hopefully CM Punk comes out a little bit better than he did the last time he kind of feuded with Triple H a couple of years ago. So I think CM Punk's gonna have a bigger year. I think Punk is a guy that could really, if the rumors are true that his contract is coming up, he'll ride that wave once again. It will get people talking and people get a buzz about him. I wouldn't be shocked if we see a world title reign at some point with him one more time as well. So I'm going to go CM Punk as having a bigger year than Daniel Bryan in 2014.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. So let's move on to story of the year, and this one's going to be a lot different. The reaction that I got in the Camel Clutch blog is a lot different from the Wrestler of the Year. Where Wrestler of the Year was a unanimous runaway with Daniel Bryan, where with this story of the year, I had different responses from everybody, which was great. And you know, there were some stories that were picked up here that I forgot about, and so let me run through them, and I'll talk to the both of you about your picks, and we can kind of touch on some of the others. So for me, I thought the story of the year was Bruno Sammartino entering the WWE Hall of Fame. I just never saw it happening, even when all the reports were coming out that a deal was close and that Triple H was in talks with them. I said, no way. You know, having had the honor of interviewing Bruno Sammartino for probably a dozen times or so since 2000 and getting to know him over the phone and personal conversations. I mean, this man just hated everything that was going on in the WWE. He hated Vince McMahon with a passion, and I just never saw it happening. So for me, that was the biggest wow story of 2013. And curious, after I run through these, what your thoughts were on that. Brett, of course. Darren Young coming out as the first openly gay WWE superstar, and you know what? That's huge. And when I saw your picks come through, I thought to myself, you know what? He's got something there, because that is an absolutely big story. But now, and it's funny, and you can say the same thing about Bruno. Now it's like, you know, people see Darren Young on TV, and it's not a big deal anymore. WWE really, I thought were conservative, and which is an ironic word to you here, very conservative with this story, and that they really didn't play it up too much, and which is a good thing, because Lord knows how tasteless their stories and angles would have been. Tom Clark had DDP working with Scott Hall and Jake Roberts. Not necessarily what I'd probably call a WWE story of the year, but you have two guys there, one Hall of Famer, another guy who probably should be in the Hall of Fame, and a guy who will be on Old School Raw pretty soon. So could fall into that category. Dustin Nichols had Daniel Bryan's ascension to the main event. Big story. We've certainly talked about that. Eric Darcy, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Chris Jericho joining Podcast One. I don't know if it's the biggest story of the year, but it is a big story. If you really do look at it, two guys that weren't doing a whole lot and then all of a sudden come out there and start doing podcasts. I think the bigger story there is that they're doing these podcasts outside of the WWE, is that WWE didn't sign these guys up to do podcasts on their own network. And finally, Jeff, which really, again, like Brett, when I saw this one come through, I was blown away. I'm like, wow, this is a huge story. Will The Rock ever wrestle again? And he just recently talked about it on Twitter, and he kind of said maybe at WrestleMania 31, but he's being very non-committal. He also, if I remember correct, and Jeff, you could probably touch on this, he put something on Twitter about one of his New Year's, something with New Year's, and he said something about slowing down, which isn't necessarily a good thing for those wrestling fans looking to get him back in the ring. So there you go. Those are the big stories of the year for the WWE. Brett, let's start off with you. You set your story, Darren Young coming out as the first openly gay superstar. Thoughts on that, and thoughts on some of these other choices here?
Well, first, to be fair to Eric Darcy, Stone Cold Steve Austin and Chris Jericho doing their own podcast this year. Both of their podcasts have been absolutely fantastic.
Yes,
and I hope more people follow up with shows in the future like them. But Eric Darcy, for some reason I believe his runner-ups probably included the Fozzy tour was probably on there.
Yes, probably.
Maybe Chris Jericho's return at the Royal Rumble and facing Fandango in the first place. I'm sure they were in his running as well.
I'm sure they were.
For me, I thought that Darren Young coming out as the first openly gay WWE superstar was the biggest story of the year. Like you mentioned, when you had mentioned Bruno Sammartino, to me, that was something that I didn't even think about when I was filling out the ballot. But that was also huge, because I also never saw that coming. With the Darren Young thing, I think that that's another story that people really didn't see. You think the WWE, you think this masculine mainstream business where people you would think would be afraid to come out like Darren Young did, and he did that, and it garnered such mainstream attention everywhere. I mean, for the few weeks after that, he was on the Today Show. I believe he was on the Ellen DeGeneres Show, TMZ. He was all over the place. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing Darren Young. I think for the WWE, it was a great thing. Like you said, they were very conservative with it. While they mentioned it on their website, I believe they had a brief promo about it on Raw, if I'm not mistaken. And to me, it was a brave declaration. It kind of paved the way for future WWE stars who may be gay to make the jump. And, I don't think it's going to be very long before we see this happen again, where maybe there's more professional wrestlers that are like Darren Young. And I really think that was an awesome thing that happened this year. And it's funny that you mentioned that the WWE chose to really not incorporate it into their storylines or anything like that. And thank God that Darren Young did this while he was in WWE, because had he done this in TNA, he probably would have been wrapped up in what's that, caution tape, and
well, nobody would have seen it anyway, so it's not like it matters.
We've seen that happen before.
Yes. So Jeff, how about you? The Rock, possibly not wrestling again, and you know what? I mean, recent tweets seem to be leaning in that direction. What do you think now that you've heard some of these other stories? Now, you still sticking with that one?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with The Rock here because I remember how much of a story it was for WrestleChat.net in particular the day after WrestleMania. I mean, because we got to figure the day after WrestleMania is one of the biggest wrestling days of the year. It's post-WrestleMania. Fans are amped for what happened at WrestleMania. Fans are amped for the Monday Night Raw that following night. And all we had heard for, I felt like 6 months, maybe even close to a year, was that there would be a Rock versus Brock match at WrestleMania 30, and they would set that up the next night on Raw. All of a sudden, I see on my Twitter feed, I see Brett and the fine folks at WrestleChat.net posting that, Rock has left WWE. He left that night. Nobody knows what's going on. They're scrambling with scripts. It completely changed the, overall face of that Raw for that night, and it was still a fantastic Raw, but it also, changed where WWE was going to head for the next 6 to 12 months. What was their plans for WrestleMania? Where would The Rock be implanted back into programming? And then you find out that The Rock is injured. And then, Rock is doing these interviews shortly thereafter with various news outlets saying that, he wrestled his last match. He accomplished everything he wanted to do with John Cena. It was a success. WWE made money. It was the highest, buy-rated WrestleMania in years, or however, money that was spent from people in attendance, all that fine stuff. And for me, I think it was a little bit more political for The Rock, and I find it very funny that he comes out, a couple days ago and does this Rock talk and responds to those rumors, saying that the plan was between him, Vince, and Brock was to do a match at WrestleMania 30. That's not happening now. They may do something at WrestleMania 31. I think The Rock immediately went on to the PR front to cover his own ass and make sure that if there was anybody in Hollywood that was willing to, hey, let's sign this guy up, he could be the new face of, the new Doom 2, whatever he wants to do, Fast and Furious 7. Now they're not afraid to sign the guy because I think people in Hollywood, and you can't blame The Rock for doing this because he's going to make a lot more money in Hollywood than he would in professional wrestling. He came out on the PR front and said, I'm done with wrestling. Yeah, you could sign me up for the movie. I'll have the surgery and I'll be ready to go in June or July. But I'm done wrestling now. And it seemed like to me that it was kind of sad, 2 years later for me being a huge Rock fan, him coming out and saying that I'm not leaving the WWE again. I'll still be here. And, he's still around. He'll still tweet about it, all that stuff. But he's gone again. And he's doing it for the betterment of his acting career, which when money and dollars speak, you can't really blame him for it.
And Brett, you have a couple of honorable mentions here on your story of the year, and you too had did The Rock walk out in the WWE as one of your honorable mentions?
Yeah, that was a huge story. We broke our single day traffic record with that story, and it was a huge story. And the Rock talk thing the other day, I mean, he seems to kind of want to hint at maybe WrestleMania 31. I thought it was a little weird that he openly came out and said had said the plans about him and Brock Lesnar.
Yes.
It was a huge story. It was absolutely a huge story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, looking ahead in 2014, and I mean, you just never know what's going to happen in pro wrestling, but, with Vince and the WWE having virtually everybody locked up these days, not a whole lot of surprises you could see anymore in pro wrestling. But looking into your crystal ball here, what do you think or the bigger story of 2014 would be? For me, I mean, there are a couple of different choices, or a couple of different clouds hanging around out there. There's Hulk Hogan's future. I think it's just as big of a story if Hogan does not come back to the WWE as if he does come back to the WWE. But I think we all feel that he's coming back. So I think I don't even know if there's a bigger story than that when you look at the magnitude of Hogan's star power in the WWE and this guy coming back. Randy Savage possibly going into the Hall of Fame. Hogan possibly inducting Savage into the Hall of Fame. That's another cloud that's hanging around. And then there's the network too. Nobody's really quite sure how this thing is going to go out. WrestleMania going on the network. You get a free access to WrestleMania. WWE looking for 1 million subscribers, which I think is absurd, and taking their B shows and putting them on there. I mean, there's a whole lot of clouds right now out there for big stories in 2014. Jeff?
Oh, I don't know if you want me to go there first.
Anybody, feel free.
Oh, sorry about that. For me, I would say Ultimate Warrior as well. What they're going to do with Warrior in 2014, if he's going to be inducted in the Hall of Fame. The network is certainly a big issue. How's it going to come off? I read something that was going to be, as you put there before, Eric, similar to like what UFC is doing right now with subscriptions rather than putting them on broadcast televisions,
right?
On various network providers. I think outside of WWE, I think the two biggest stories, and they're similar in this context, is what happens with TNA wrestling and ROH wrestling in 2014. We closed out 2013 looking at the potential end of TNA, a potential buyer in a guy like Billy Corgan. You've also heard the name Toby Keith. AJ Styles and Jeff Jarrett have reportedly left TNA wrestling. I know there's people still out there that believe it could possibly be part of a storyline. Is TNA really that much of a sinking ship? As for ROH wrestling, I mean, you're entering, I think, the third year of the Sinclair Broadcasting Group and hasn't been successful. Will it ever be successful? Will it ever reach the heights that it did when it was kind of a smaller market indie promotion than it has now, having television deals and a huge money backer in Sinclair Broadcast Group? So I feel like on the outside of WWE, the two big stories will be what happens with TNA and ROH in 2014. Inside WWE, I think the Warrior, does he go in the Hall of Fame, as well as you put before, Eric, the WWE Network?
Yeah, and Brett, before I get to you, Jeff, you hit on a lot of great stories outside of the WWE for 2013 as well. I mean, TNA, I don't know if there's even a bigger story outside of pro wrestling than just the chaos inside TNA as the year progressed. I mean, all of a sudden one day they're cutting a bunch of guys. Next thing you know, they're off pay-per-view. Then Hogan's leaving. AJ Styles is leaving. They have bookers in and out. I mean, just pure chaos. And Ring of Honor, I mean, talk about a company flying under the radar. There were the expectations were huge when you had a television company, a television broadcasting company buying this company. And here we are entering 2014, and they are no better, if not worse, than they were at that time. Jim Cornette is out as a booker. Everybody thought the brilliant Jim Cornette was going to turn things around. He's out as a booker. I couldn't even tell you who the Ring of Honor champion is these days, and it's no disrespect. I just don't follow the product. Just so many questions around Ring of Honor. So, Brett, a lot of balls being thrown into your court here in and out of the WWE, looking at 2014 and bigger stories. And of course, if you want to touch on some of those stories there outside of the WWE in 2013.
I share a lot of the same big stories as you guys. I think Warrior and Savage possibly going into the Hall of Fame would be a really big deal. The WWE Network is another big deal, and also kind of the branch out from that. The WWE is getting ready to open up on the marketplace and maybe licensing every single one of their programs with one show. They're going to sign this maybe close to $800 million contract with some network out there. Could it still be with NBC Universal? Could they move to an ESPN or a Fox Sports 1? These are things that are out there that I think are definitely possible. And under the radar story that I think has a very good possibility of happening this year is maybe the Undertaker retiring for good. We're at WrestleMania 30 years ago. Many people thought that WrestleMania 30 was going to be kind of the benchmark there. And I think with WrestleMania 31 not going to Dallas, Texas, I think that may kind of put an end to that. I think that's really possible as well. So those would be the stories. I mean, outside of WWE, I agree with you guys on TNA. I really don't know at this point if they're going to be in business next year. We've heard the rumors of them possibly selling. People are in and out. Jeff Jarrett leaving, I think, is bigger than most people believe.
Yes.
And then two very minor things that could happen in 2014, but I think would be some decent stories. Is John Cena finally giving in to Nikki Bella's engagement demand? I think that would be huge, and I think maybe Luke Hawx finally gets a shot with one of the big three.
I hope so. I hope so. Pro Wrestling Radio could use the publicity, and of course, I'd like to see Luke do well as well. All right, guys, let's move to match of the year, and this one was interesting because a lot of people had the same choices. Yet there were a couple of curveballs thrown in there. Myself, I went with Punk and the Undertaker at WrestleMania. To me, and it pained me because I'm not a CM Punk fan, but this match was just all kinds of awesome. I just thought that as far as intensity and drama and action and story, I don't think there was anything in 2013 that came close to topping it. I really don't. And again, match of the year is all a matter of taste. What I like may not be, what Jeff or Brett likes. So again, all a matter of taste. But for me, it was Punk and Undertaker. I don't think anything touched it. For Brett, it was Cena and CM Punk from that infamous Monday Night Raw match back in February, which seemed to be a very popular choice on the blog, as well as with Jeff, who also had the same matchup. So we'll have some interesting conversation there. Undertaker versus CM Punk for Tom Clark. John Cena versus Daniel Bryan for Dustin Nichols. That one as well. That was one I thought about, but I didn't think it came close to Undertaker and Punk for me anyway. And then you had Dan and Seth as well with Punk and Cena from February. So, Jeff, I'll throw it to you. Punk and Cena, what was it about that match that made it so special?
It was definitely the intensity of the match and just how well Punk and Cena have the type of chemistry that I would compare to Rock versus Austin and Michaels versus Hart, to me in particular, because you don't see that type of chemistry with many guys in the ring. And Punk and Cena have really carried that banner these last several years of being that go-to match when you need it. And thankfully, WWE hasn't jammed those two wrestling with one another down our throats like they did in the beginning there, but they've just had fantastic matches. You go back Money in the Bank, you go back to their match at SummerSlam that was pretty good. I feel like this match on Monday Night Raw in February 2013 was the best match of them all. It was better than Money in the Bank. It had fans, on their feet. It had the announcing of Michael Cole was very, very underrated. I went back and I watched that match again, and it went for like 25 to 30 minutes, and Michael Cole was great. For a guy who's been overshadowed throughout his entire career by the greatness that is the legendary Hall of Famer Jim Ross, I thought he did a fantastic job of just letting the moment breathe and just giving it some amazing announcing firepower. And to a couple points that Brett would make in his response for the blog is you were seeing Cena do moves that he typically doesn't do. It's you've got the 5 moves of doom. And clearly CM Punk brings the best out of John Cena, and John Cena brings the best out of CM Punk. And I think the final point to this is that, really made this the match of the year for me is that they did this all on free television. It was almost like one of those things that when you were done watching Monday Night Raw, you turn off the television, you look both ways in your, wherever you are, your living room, looking at the television and go, did WWE really just give me that match for free? Am I getting punked right now? And I just thought it was a fantastic match. And for me, it was the match of the year.
And Brett, you felt the same way. You also had some interesting honorable mentions. The first being that Antonio Cesaro, Sami Zayn 2 out of 3 falls match at NXT. I'll culp to it. I don't watch NXT, and I probably should. You obviously do. You also had Bryan and Cena. You had the Undertaker CM Punk. The SmackDown Money in the Bank ladder match was a match that I was actually considering at one point. So, you have a lot of great content here, Brett, but what was it about Cena and Punk that put it over the top, that made it different, that made it better than those honorable mentions?
I think it's a lot of the same things that Jeff said. It was going into the match. The story was that these two were facing off for the winner to go on to WrestleMania 29, the face of The Rock. And there was also the underlying story that John Cena had yet to beat CM Punk. Um, this match was a roller coaster. The fact that it was on free TV, like Jeff said, I think made it all the better. Michael Cole, once again, was very, very underrated. You had John Cena reaching outside of his 5 moves of doom. He had a Hurricane Rana. He had a power bomb. That had social media blowing up just in itself. People were amazed that, oh my God, John Cena can actually wrestle. CM Punk, I believe he used a banned pile driver in that match. Obviously John Cena went on and won the match, but I just don't remember a match this year in 2013 that had people talking like that. It was a fantastic match. It was a roller coaster. Going into the match, everybody had knew that the plan was to do Cena and The Rock 2, but that match actually, for a while there, kind of got rid of that belief that that was actually going to happen. People actually held out that, you know what, maybe we will see Rock and Punk. And for me, that's what did it. And one last point, what really ruined, and this may be really petty, but what ruined CM Punk versus The Undertaker at WrestleMania 29 for me was actually being there in person. While it was really fantastic to see live and to say that I was there, losing the commentary to me and not really having all the up close angles on TV kind of ruined it for me. I did go back. I've watched it a few times since then with all of that, but it wasn't the same to me.
Yeah, interesting stuff there. Any matches you guys can think about right now off the top of your head, and you could absolutely say no, but any matches off the top of your head that you're looking forward to in 2014 or you hope get made in 2014? Jeff?
I think for me, I would go. I'm really interested now in what they're doing with Bray Wyatt and Daniel Bryan. I have a lot of high hopes for Bray Wyatt as well as Daniel Bryan heading into this year. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they're going to do with that. And of course, the rumored Brock Lesnar Undertaker matches. Because you go back to 2002 when they were doing their stuff at like No Mercy, the Hell in a Cell match. That was fantastic stuff. I thought they had a great feud. So Lesnar Undertaker to me, I mean, that could really be the one match everybody always wants to know. We all know what the end result's going to be, as Brett pointed out when it came to Punk and John Cena. Like, we all knew John Cena was going to wrestle The Rock, so none of us were surprised by the end result of that match. And typically, we're not surprised when The Undertaker wins at WrestleMania, but we seem to be so enthralled with these matches with The Undertaker at WrestleMania because, the close, near falls, the possibility like, wow, could he really lose? And I feel like you've got Shawn Michaels, you've had Triple H, you've had CM Punk. If they do the Lesnar match, this is a guy that could legitimately snap the streak and make people believe it. And that's something that's very hard to do in professional wrestling nowadays. So if I had to pick 2 matches, Bray Wyatt, Daniel Bryan, Undertaker, Lesnar, both hopefully at WrestleMania this year.
Jeff, making people believe, that is a great segue here because we're going to get into the angle of the year. And for me, it was Mark Henry. It was Mark Henry when he swerved the entire WWE universe. He teased that retirement speech. He brought his family into it, and then he just beat up John Cena. And I am certainly no Mark Henry fan, and I certainly was not looking forward to any kind of a Mark Henry versus John Cena feud. But I thought in terms of angles and in terms of believability and just television moments that was just awesome television moments, I can't think of anything better that I watched this year on WWE television than that night that Mark Henry came out there with that speech. Unfortunately, it didn't really go many places after that. And it kind of goes against my old school mentality where, my old school mentality is the angle of the year has to be something that drew the most money. Obviously, this angle did not draw the most money, but for me, I just thought it was an awesome moment. I thought it was a great angle and one that doesn't come along too often in 2013, 2014, in this era of wrestling, one that surprises you like that and gives you that oh crap moment. For Brett, it was CM Punk's retribution, his quest for retribution against Paul Heyman. Tom Clark shared those same sentiments with you, Brett. Dustin Nichols loved the Wyatt family. And it's, I'm not necessarily sold yet on the Wyatt family. They came in with a lot of hype. I think there have been peaks and valleys with the Wyatts. Should be a very interesting 2014. See where that goes. Seth had the Authority versus Daniel Bryan. Dan as well had the Authority. Eric Darcy had the Undisputed Championship Unification, which could have been a story of the year, which is funny that the three of us, we didn't even talk about that as being a story of the year, yet, they unified the two world titles. So what does that tell you about the WWE and those two belts and what championship belts mean in 2013? And then, of course, Jeff, Triple H turning heel at SummerSlam and Randy Orton cashing in to become WWE champion. Now, Jeff, a lot of great angles in 2013. Only a couple of wow moments, so to speak. So what was it about Triple H's turn at SummerSlam and Orton cashing in that put that over the top for you?
Well, for me, one of the things that I really love is watching wrestling with wrestling fans on Twitter. And Brett's one of those guys that will tweet. You're one of those guys that will tweet during this, Eric. And during SummerSlam, everybody knew, like, hey, is Triple H, is he going to turn heel? Orton's going to come down. I mean, we all know what's going to happen. And then as you watch SummerSlam, like, fans were like, people were literally tweeting, like, wait a minute, maybe they're going to keep the title on him. Maybe they're not going to cash in. The confetti's flying. Triple H is still in the ring, which is a little bit weird. But, maybe they're giving him this moment. Maybe they'll do something and swerve us all on Monday Night Raw. But maybe they'll give us this SummerSlam moment. Fans seem to be into it. People were chanting yes. And then WWE went through with what they ended up doing with Randy Orton coming down to the ring, Triple H giving the pedigree. And it was just one of those moments. And for me, similar to what you had put in there, Eric, for your angle of the year, the crowd plays a lot into it. And I felt like the crowd in Los Angeles that night was particularly pretty good for this angle. They seemed to be really enthralled with what was going on. They seemed to be popping when Randy Orton came down to the ring. They seemed excited when Triple H hit the pedigree. Very similar when Mark Henry was really swerving the WWE universe and on his possible retirement. So for me, I felt like, the Triple H pedigree to Daniel Bryan, Randy Orton winning the WWE Championship, I felt like that was going to be a moment that would really solidify Daniel Bryan as a major player in professional wrestling. Some may debate whether or not that actually lived up to the potential that it at one time had. But I mean, that was such a major storyline for, the rest of 2013. And for what we're led to believe right now, that is, the kickoff to what we'll see come to an end at WrestleMania 30 as well. So for me, anytime there is WrestleMania implications in an angle, especially in like the month of August, I got to give it the angle of the year. So that's why I went Daniel Bryan getting the pedigree and Randy Orton winning the WWE Championship.
And for Brett, you went with Punk's quest for retribution against Paul Heyman, and you weren't alone in that choice. You also had a couple of honorable mentions with the Shield's lengthy title reign, the Rhodes family versus the Authority, very interesting angle there, and a lot of fun at moments, especially with Dusty and Stephanie, and of course anything that didn't involve The Miz, and I couldn't agree with you more there. So what was it about Punk's quest for retribution against Paul Heyman that put it over the top for you over those other angles?
It really was just the chemistry that Punk and Paul Heyman have together. Aside from the match with Brock Lesnar, none of the matches were really memorable, but just the back and forth between Punk and Heyman, and is he finally going to get his hands on Paul Heyman? To me, that was the angle of the year. I couldn't stomach to pick anything else with the Authority. It was jammed down our throats at the point. But really, and I said it on the ballot, I said for all intents and purposes, JTG could have been one of the Paul Heyman guys, and it still would have been compelling just simply because of the chemistry between Punk and Paul. And I don't think that there was anything that was really close to it. But I will tell you, the Mark Henry thing, I had forgotten all about that, but that was fantastic. That piece of I will go back. I still go back and watch that. That was one of those things that just nobody saw coming.
Yeah, I mean, we already have a candidate already for Angle of the Year with Brock Lesnar and coming back and destroying Mark Henry through the table. It's one of those deals, man, where Brock, I think, gets overlooked for this stuff so often because he's just so good. Like every time he comes out, it's a great moment. It's a great angle. I mean, it really is. And I think that it's to the point now where people just expect it and they just love it so much that they overlook it as anything special. Guys, anybody?
That's true. I definitely can agree with that. I mean, and it doesn't help that the WWE this past weekend, I mean, maybe this is something we'll talk about this time next year. Yeah. But this past weekend when they did the SmackDown tapings on Sunday, they essentially ruined the surprise for us a little bit, but it was still fun to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeff, thoughts on Brock's angles? 2013 is his already angle of the year candidate with Mark Henry.
I loved it. Minus him screaming like a 3-year-old girl, I thought it was fantastic because it's a legitimate badass. Brock Lesnar's a legitimate badass, and Mark Henry's a legitimate badass as well. For the last 8 years, we've been told this guy is the world's strongest man. He's the silverback. What is his Hall of Pain and all that stuff. And Brock Lesnar just destroyed him. So for me, it was a fantastic angle, fantastic moment. And I feel like I agree with you, Eric. I think we underappreciate every time Brock Lesnar comes out and does these moments. I think we underappreciate it too much as wrestling fans because it becomes the norm all of a sudden.
Yep.
Maybe it could be a story of the year for 2014, but also regarding Brock Lesnar, I really do feel like where there's smoke, there's fire, and I really could see somehow Brock Lesnar going back to the UFC. I really think he wants to, and I can see that being something big that happens this year. Maybe he tries to get out of his WWE contract, or I think that's something we could see as well.
Well, if that happens, Brett, I am bringing you back on, and we're going to do an entire Camel Clutch blog extra about Brock going back to the UFC, because that would be huge. I personally don't feel that it's going to happen. I don't think that Brock would ever be cleared physically to do it. I think that, the guy had part of his spleen removed, if I remember correctly. He had the diverticulitis. I don't think he has the stamina to go through a 30 or a 30-day or 6-week training cycle to get it done. And I don't think that there's a fight right now. And again, I don't want to get too UFC because we're talking WWE, but I don't think there's a fight right now that would make it worth his while. I mean, that Fedor fight absolutely would have made it worth his while. I don't think it was coincidence that all of these rumors came out on the weekend before he was appearing on Monday Night Raw. So I don't know, but it's certainly a story to watch. Hey, listen, as the owner of the CamelClutchBlog.com, I love it. I love these rumors. I'm sure you love them too, Brett. Over at WrestleCheck. Keep them coming is what I'd say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let me ask you guys a question. I know we don't want to go too UFC heavy, but you guys are bigger UFC fans than I am. Does the UFC need Brock Lesnar in 2014 more than ever?
More than ever. Easily. With George St. Pierre retiring, Anderson Silva snaps his leg and he's likely done. Cain Velasquez, he's going to be done until probably, I believe, September or October at the earliest.
Yeah.
It's really ironic that a year ago Dana White did not want women in the UFC, and here we are 1 year later, and his biggest draw is Ronda Rousey.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna, I won't break it down too much because I don't want to dissuade the wrestling fans listen to it. But simple answer, Jeff, yes, absolutely. I mean, all you got to do is look at the numbers that Brock brought, and I mean, nobody has touched those numbers consistently as Brock did. I mean, I've written a couple of blogs on why Brock should be in their Hall of Fame, and I always point to the numbers. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if I remember correctly, he's responsible for 3 of the top 5 biggest draws in UFC history. And nobody has come close to beating his UFC 100 record, ever. I mean, that might change with the last pay-per-view. Those numbers aren't in yet, but yes, I do believe that they need him more than ever.
Nobody's ever come close. Not even Randy Couture.
Yeah, not even Brett's favorite. So, let's wrap this up with Breakout Star of the Year. I thought it was a unanimous choice with Daniel Bryan. I thought it would be a unanimous choice for Daniel Bryan. Brett and I, we both went with Daniel Bryan, but it wasn't. But for me, I did wrestle with this, no pun intended, because I looked at it, well, Daniel Bryan is not exactly new to the center stage. I mean, he's already had a championship around his waist. He was pushed heavy on SmackDown for a little while. He's been in that top spot. He feuded with CM Punk a while back in that top spot as well. So it's not like he's new to that spot, but he had never been pushed to the level that he was recently, and he had never connected with the fans to that level. I mean, whether he's a draw or not, we could do a 2-hour podcast on that. So I'm not going to go into the specifics there, but I just think the way that he broke out this year, I just can't imagine anybody doing anything remotely close to that in the near future. Tom Clark had Gold Dust. You could certainly, and Tom Clark is quick to mention that it may be more of a comeback star of the year than actually a breakout star of the year. And yeah, absolutely. Comeback star, I can't think of a bigger one than Gold Dust. Dustin Nichols had Bray Wyatt, breakout star of the year. I think he's still got a little bit of a ways to go. He certainly could be that breakout star of the year if the rumors come to life of him wrestling John Cena at WrestleMania. Jeff, you had The Shield as breakout stars of the year. And you know what? I went back and forth with Daniel Bryan and the Shield, and you could argue that the Shield technically broke out more than Daniel Bryan did in 2014. Absolutely. Seth as well had the Shield, and Eric Darcy had Daniel Bryan, and Dan also had Goldust. So, Brett, I'll throw it to you. You and I are in agreement on Daniel Bryan. You had a couple of honorable mentions. You kind of broke up the Shield. You had Ambrose and Langston and Zeb and Sandow, Bray Wyatt as well, Roman Reigns, who looks like he may be the breakout star of 2014. What was it about Daniel Bryan that put it over the top for you?
It was like you said, I just feel like nobody else skyrocketed like Daniel Bryan did. Nobody solidified themselves as a main eventer like Daniel Bryan did. And I also I struggled to differentiate the impact of the other people that I listed there, like Dean Ambrose, Roman Reigns, Big E Langston, Damian Sandow, Bray Wyatt. Those guys to me all kind of had a very similar year, and I just couldn't pick Ambrose or anybody from the Shield because of that. I kind of grouped them together, and I think that their best times are behind them. Roman Reigns is likely the guy that we'll be talking about next year, but Daniel Bryan and also I mentioned him in my honorable mentions, but Zeb Coulter's work this year was phenomenal, and I think it's really, really underrated. But he was terrific this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. I mean, you want to talk about comebacks. You know, you can talk about Dustin Rhodes, but here's a guy that hadn't been on the national scene for years. I mean, years. And and a very friendly guy who's always kept in touch with his fans on Facebook. I've been friends with him on Facebook for a while. I corresponded with him years ago. He's always a super nice guy. Had a horrific tragedy happen in his family. I think it was last year. Brett, was
yeah.
it? It was. So I mean, God bless him and all the success that he had. And yes, you're right. Very, very often overlooked and underrated. So Jeff, you had the Shield. What was it about the Shield that made them bigger breakout stars as a unit than Daniel Bryan?
Well, I agree with you guys that someone like Daniel Bryan could be the breakout star of the year. But for me, I kind of went from like an NFL perspective in the fact that when, if like last year, Peyton Manning won the Offensive Player of the Year, but Adrian Peterson won the MVP award. You can't give the guy like both awards. So, I mean, I could very well have made Daniel Bryan the breakout star of the year as well, but I felt like he was higher placed on the Wrestler of the Year. For me, the Shield, I mean, they just, they were on par with Daniel Bryan when it came out to being, who was huge stars. Brett and I were both at WrestleMania 29 this year, and granted, the Shield was the first wrestlers to come out to start off the show, but they got a huge ovation from the fans. The fans were completely behind them. Fans have been completely behind them on the internet and at the shows throughout all of 2013. I like what every single one of the guys does in the ring. I feel like Seth Rollins' match with John Cena a couple weeks ago on SmackDown was fantastic. Dean Ambrose is a great wrestler. Roman Reigns is poised to have a Batista-like breakout in 2014. They're a group they've just made a lot of moves, and it's very rare nowadays for, let alone one wrestler to break out, but like three wrestlers at the same time in a wrestling world where we don't really use stables as much as we used to have a stable breakout as much as they did. That's why I went with the Shield as the breakout stars in 2013.
So let me ask you this, Jeff, and then I'll ask Brett as well. We've talked a little bit about Roman Reigns here. Do you think when we're doing this podcast next year, we're talking about Roman Reigns as the breakout star, or do plans get derailed? Do things not move forward as expected? Is it Roman Reigns that just flops in that spot, or they just get cold feet? Do you think all of these rumors about Roman Reigns and the plans they have for him for this big 2014 sustain throughout the year?
I want to say, I don't want to be on the fence about this, but I'll preface it by saying that optimism from wrestling fans, I think you have to be optimistic for some of these big stars nowadays. We all thought that Ryback coming out of 2012 would probably be the breakout star in 2013. You would have thought at the end of 2012 that he would have had to have some sort of world title run at some point. I mean, he was such a major player, and he did nothing in 2013. He actually took a major step back. Mm-hmm. Guys like Dolph Ziggler, they've had big plans for. You can even make a case that Daniel Bryan's plans never really panned out as well as they could. But I will say that I do think Roman Reigns lives up to the potential of having a breakout year in 2014. Reason being is that WWE, they love their big, Brutus-looking superstars. They love that Batista frame, that John Cena frame, that Brock Lesnar frame where it looks like a guy could legitimately pick you apart if you got into a fight with him. They don't like to put that mantra on guys like The Miz. They like doing that with someone like Roman Reigns. So I do think Roman Reigns lives up to the breakout potential in 2014, barring any injuries.
Brett?
Absolutely. I think in 2014, the two guys that we're talking about for possible breakout start of the year are either Roman Reigns or Bray Wyatt, and I think that's clear cut going into the year.
Yeah, and how do you think that shapes out? If we are at the end of the year with Bray Wyatt and Roman Reigns as big stars, and WWE, there are some guys they have a lot of patience for. There are some guys like Dolph Ziggler that they have no patience for. Do you think that with whatever happens with Bray Wyatt and Roman Reigns, do you think at the end of 2014 they're in a better place than they are today?
I sure hope so. And Dave Meltzer, I mean, he tends to know what he's talking about. And in the Wrestling Observer last week, he mentioned the big plans for Bray. You know, whether or not they actually come through, I believe that he was on to something. And that, you know, there was the rumors that Bray Wyatt could go on the WrestleMania 30 and main event against John Cena. And in that very same report, a few paragraphs down, it talks about if something happens to the CM Punk Triple H match, that the backup plan for that would be Roman Reigns. So to have even Roman Reigns, Triple H, and Bray Wyatt, John Cena in the discussion, I think speaks volumes of where the WWE wants those guys to be.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Well, that covers it, guys. A lot to talk about, a lot covered. This was great stuff, getting a deeper look into 2013.